And we're live.
Hi everyone, welcome to the CL MOOC Make With Me for July 29th. And today we're going to be discussing ways to move our CL MOOC learning forward into the days and months ahead. I'm Michael Weller. I'm in San Gabriel, California, about 20 minutes east of Los Angeles. And I want to talk about first just one of the things I really want to try to do is have my students create instructions for each other on how to do different activities, kind of like a mate bank for my classroom. And I thought it would be neat if, as everyone else introduces themselves, if you could just tell us your name, your location, and one thing from the summer from CL MOOC that you're just dying to try out in August or September.
Okay, I can chime in. I'm Grace Raphael. I'm in New York City. I'm in Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm really excited about the possibilities that this CL MOOC has really started for me regarding working with teachers and connecting teachers with each other. There's so much richness in terms of the connections that happened amongst us that I think teachers would really welcome within their own communities.
And I'm Mallory McNeil. I'm currently at the NWP offices in Philadelphia, but I'll be teaching middle school writing in the fall. So I'm actually really excited because so many of the makes this this summer were about hacking writing and telling stories and things like that. So I think one of the things I was really thinking about actually was going back to the very first cycle with the how-tos. I could really see that as something that could be incorporated into a classroom, but I also could see trying to build in digital tools, and I'm hoping that I'll have those resources to do a lot more of the digital storytelling and creating with my students.
It looks like Anna just joined us. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself? We just started. We're giving our name, our location, and one thing from the summer that we're dying to try out in August or September. Anna, it looks like you're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anna. I'm in New York City currently, and my make this week is actually a move. I can probably show you. I'm literally packing the last of my belongings and moving to Illinois. So I have just a few more hours here. You said one thing that I'm dying to try out?
Yes, something from the summer that you really want to try out.
Yeah. Okay. Give me 1 minute to think about that because I want to think about that for a second.
Okay, so we'll come back to you, and
yeah.
I want to just throw out another question, which is, what does connected learning mean to you? And that's for anybody to jump in. Anna, if you want to weigh in on that, or if somebody else wants to jump in before while Anna's thinking about the previous question. And not that we have to go in any particular order, but...
Well, I can really jump in because I've just been thinking about this
a
little bit. I was thinking about all of the different adjectives that we put before things recently. So, like, we have digital literacies, we have... give me some other ones, Paul. We have connected learning, we have all of these words.
Learning.
21st century learning.
21st century learning.
Learning.
Yeah. So,
something called blended learning is becoming.
Blended learning. Yeah, and then all the words before literacies, right? There's art literacies and whatever. There's hundreds and hundreds of these, social justice literacies, and I was thinking about, I think for a time those types of descriptive words help us distinguish something that we may not have been paying attention to before, but eventually they can go away. Like eventually, and And I like the moment when they can start to dissipate. You know, when it was like no longer necessary to distinguish between literacies and digital literacies, or learning and connected learning. Because for me, what connected learning is learning. But what we're doing by you know, talking about connected learning versus learning is trying to distinguish between what we I guess through the ways that we have been doing teaching and learning for so many years, the ways that we've been structuring that has kind of limited the definition for a lot of people what learning looks like and can mean. And for me, real learning is something that has a place in my life, is connected to the people around me, is changes the way I see the world. You know, it's not whether or not I have some discrete pieces of knowledge that I can put down on a test, right? So so I think connected learning is one way to highlight some of the parts about learning that may not get attention with our old definitions. But I think eventually that connected word can go away, and we can just talk about learning. And I think that'd be like a goal.
That's an interesting point. This morning, when Christina and I were talking, I was saying that to me, connected learning is kind of like you were saying, Anna, just learning. Or thinking of it from the perspective of pedagogy, it's just good teaching. It's always been around. These are very, very old ideas. For me, what connected learning highlights is the possibilities of the new technology to make more connections. I was reading a James Moffat book, and he's talking about the problem in a lot of composition classes is that the only audience is the teacher. And he's saying, well, so one thing you can do is have the audience be the rest of the class. And I think he wrote this book in like the late 60s, and so that was a very good solution to the problem of having only the teacher, because you didn't have blogs and you didn't have you know, online places where you could post. And I mean, obviously the fact that we're having this conversation right now would have been incredibly expensive, if possible at all, in 1968. So the technology gives us the opportunity to connect to new audiences, for example. So that for me was the kind of the big that was the new thing of connected learning. When I first encountered it, I was having a hard time understanding what it was, maybe because it was so, it's just good teaching, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's just learning. And for a while, I had a hard time conceptualizing it. So anyway, does anybody else want to say anything about that?
I think it's interesting too, because with connected learning, I mean, so much of it is the idea of being able to connect with different people across, you know, different spaces, time zones, but also the idea, kind of like what you were saying, Michael, is that idea of it being, I mean, it's just learning, and that idea of it being interest-driven and really organic in some ways, and allowing people to explore in whatever way makes it most applicable to their lives, I think is a really important aspect of it as well, is the, you know, it's partially the technology, but also the ways that we have more opportunities to tap into different resources and explore in ways that we might not otherwise in a classroom, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I was thinking how those explorations could be tied to larger networks and larger communities and larger structures and resources, as you're saying, than ever before. So it's like that, the opportunity to follow your passions and make real connections to larger systems is really, it's like possible in this new way.
I think what it also does is it allows the connections to be what you can make and what makes sense for you, both as a learner and for someone who's fostering learning, who's the teacher in the classroom. That making connections is what learning is. Learning isn't filling the vessel and all those other, metaphors. It's making connections with things that matter, and whatever is possible for you, whether it's technology or not. It's making that connection and the connectiveness and the community that implies, I think, is what's so rich and important about connected learning, that doesn't necessarily require that you be totally bought in or totally fitted out with the technology.
That's a really good point. No, go ahead, Anna. I'm sorry.
I was just thinking about so connected learning from the Connected Learning Alliance. They have a graphic that's really great and shows that they have these principles, and then they have like principles of learning of what connected learning is, and then they also have, is it 3 goals or something? There's like equity. There's like 3.
The
principles.
The values. And,
right.
Yeah. So equity is one of the values, and that's something that I've heard that I think is both the promise and the challenge of connected learning. And tonight was the first time when you guys were all just talking that stood out for me, this idea of equity. I mean, it's always been there, and but I haven't seen how tightly woven it is into each of the things you said. So each of you have talked about how access. Each of you have mentioned access. You've mentioned possibility. You've mentioned that you may not have the technology, right? You may not have to buy into the technology, let alone buy the technology. So I think equity is both. There's a promise of equity within connected learning, or within embedding yourself in these principles. But then there's also, or embedding the principles into your way you design your instruction. Then there's also this tension there, because connected learning doesn't mean online. It doesn't mean technology, but it definitely does highlight those things, right? So, yeah. Anyway, I don't know where. I don't have an ending of that thought. I just have a beginning of that thought.
In the kind of like white paper for connected learning, I remember the phrase leveraging technology, which helped me to understand, because I saw it as technology as not being the be-all end-all, but a tool or a method. That's actually one of the things that I learned from. So I was involved last year in CL MOOC, and then I tried out a lot of things in my classroom this past year, and one of the things I realized was that I was emphasizing specific tools too much as ends in themselves, and I realized one of the things that I want, kind of my overall goal for the upcoming school year, is going to be able to do a better job of teaching the technology as tools, and being better about situating the tools in the broader context. So, like, we're going to do. We have for lack of a better term, we have a rhetorical goal, right? And here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to, persuade our audience about something or other. And so, which tools would we be able to use? Sort of like how we teach different strategies, and these might be pen and paper strategies that we're using, and so we might have different reading strategies, and then we don't just teach one reading strategy, right, as part of a toolbox. So it's a very long-winded way of saying that I'm trying to see the technology as part of the toolbox and help my students learn how to make the right choices. And what's challenging about that, and this kind of segues into my next question, what's challenging about that is there's so many tools. And I think it was Maha who mentioned in her blog that if you just watch Terry or Kevin's feed for 20 minutes, you'll get 20 different tools, and it's true. They're always sharing tools, which is wonderful. I find the danger for me is I have this you know the do all the things meme. That's sort of my tendency. I'm that person. So what I actually found out about myself is that I have to do only some of the things, like consciously only do some of the things. So for me, it's a challenge, and this is kind of segueing into my next question, which is what do you see as being obstacles to going forward with some of the insights or the learning that you've had this year? I'm sorry, this summer. What are some obstacles that you see, and then more importantly, what are some possible solutions that you see? So I'll kind of answer my own question to wrap up my thought. Is one of the challenges is how do I teach my students who are they're on devices all the time, and they're using teenagery things like, because I teach at a high school, they're using teenagery things like Snapchat, and they're all on Twitter, and they're all on Facebook. Well, 80% of them are on Facebook, 20% of them think it's passé. And so I've got kids who are superficially digital, but who really struggle sometimes when you're introducing tools for creation. They're great consumers. They're very fluent consumers, but they need support to become creators. So I guess my obstacle or my challenge, maybe challenge is a better way of putting it, is how do I teach the tools without how do I teach them to use technology without getting caught up in the minutiae of tools, without having to do all the things, and then which tools do I select? And one solution that I've kind of brainstormed kind of ties into my thing that I want to try, which is we're going to be pushing screencasting at my site. This is independent of the summer stuff that we're doing. It's just something that my friend, who's the instructional coach, happens to be my friend, and she wants us to do screencasting as a way to give kids a chance to have access to what happens in the classroom outside of the classroom. And so as part of this push, I'm thinking, how can I have the kids work with me on making screencasts? So if there's things that they know how to do and that they're learning, make them the teachers instead of me having. Again, I guess it comes back to, like, instead of me being a gatekeeper, like, open up the gates a little bit and have the kids share what they know. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet, but that's kind of where I'm going to start. How can I have the kids, my students, how can I have them share their expertise as they're learning things? Even if it's something that I've taught, can I get a group of kids who goes, oh yeah, that's really cool, I get that, I can do that. Can I have them make a screencast? And then, I don't want to get too into like the gradiness of things, but how can I make that something that they can get, somehow demonstrate that, work that in so that they can get points for it. We don't have to talk grades. It's one of the nice things about the summer is that there's no grades. But I'm thinking of ways that I can include that in my assessment and say, okay, you did this, you contributed to the community. How can we honor you for that? So again, I'm answering my question in a rather long-winded way. So I'll stop talking. And I guess my question is, what challenges do you guys see, and what possible solutions do you see?
I think one of the first things that you've made me think about, and there were so many things you made me think about, but I think I want to sort of step back to the idea of literacy versus the idea of using tools. And what you've made me think about is what we might do with students as writers or readers, and talk to them about who they are and where they're coming into this literacy environment. I would want to have, as teachers, to actually embrace who the students are as users of technology, as participants in communities, whatever they may be. Even if there's no technology in the school, I can still have a conversation with kids in my classroom about what they do on Twitter, on Facebook, what their opinions are about that. And I think part of connected learning is making the connections to who kids are as participants, whether we make that participation part of our classroom activity or not. I think the literacy lesson for me to bring to teachers is that this is at least a conversation that I want to have with kids. And then where it moves from there is dependent on the circumstances, the situations, the curriculum, the context, etc. But I want to actually take something from what I've learned from teaching, reading, writing, and other literacies and listen to the kids first and then move from there. That's not an answer to your question, I know that, but I think what you have that's so rich in what you want to do is to move the kids to a place, from a place where they are, and I think that that's really a wonderful goal.
I think that you did answer, at least in part, for how I understood his question. And I'd love to hear more, Grace, from you about what do you think that looks like? So what does it look like to honor a student as a learner and as a participant? What does it look like to take them seriously in what they make and in what they know and how they're literate? Like, what do you think that means or looks like, I think? What would that look like in a classroom setting?
I think it might start with, when do you write? You know, when do you compose words? You know, and oftentimes, you know, we say writing, and kids think, you know, essays or, you know, the pen on the paper. But I might want to open up that conversation and say, when do you compose, you know, to communicate, to converse, and to make the communication aspect part of the start of the conversation. I know that's not a specific answer, but
no, I think well, for me it really is. Like I remember the thing that I really want to try, and that is that approach to hack your writing. To know your writing processes so well, and your tendencies of your that you do in your writing so well that you could then purposefully shape them. I mean, that would be awesome for my, you know, for people I work with, the youth that I work with. Like, I would love to get to that point and take that kind of perspective, like, just like you're saying, like, where do you write, when do you write, with whom do you write, for whom do you write, with, you know, how, with what tools, and then can we know those so well that we then can purposely change that. I mean, that's massive. I think that that's actually writing instruction.
And then when we could say, you know, when was your writing, or when did you put words out there that were effective? You know, when was writing effective for you, and what was the purpose? Who was the audience? You know, and then it goes into all those other things, which we know where, you know, where they end up. But if they start from a place where kids are already comfortable, I think it's an amazing way for them to enter into the other conversation.
I think what's valuable about what you just pointed out as well, Grace, is that one of the things connected learning can do is kind of subvert the teacher. I mentioned teacher as gatekeeper, and I think part of my evolution as a teacher has been going from the starting point of trying to control everything, like every young teacher tries to do, and then realizing that the more you cede control to your students, obviously, you know, there's structures and things that you have to have. You can't just show up and say, well, at least I don't think you should show up and say, okay, just do what you need to do and learn. That's, you know, probably just as bad as trying to control everything. But if you strategically give control over to your students, then there's more opportunities for learning. And one of the things, kind of going off what Anna mentioned about making connections, or I'm sorry, this is what Grace and Anna, both of you were talking about, making connections. At least in, I don't know how it is in other states, but at least in California, under No Child Left Behind, it was like disconnected learning. That was sort of what we were doing. We were learning disconnected skills to you know, be able to answer questions on a test, and it's not all we did, but we were very constrained. And the assessments of the day made it very difficult for us to teach in a connected way. It's kind of like if you did, you were really, really struggling against all the contextual forces that were pushing you to teach in a disconnected way. And so I think part of connected learning is making connections, but it also could be de-emphasizing the teacher's teacherness and turning over teacherness to students. And then the way you talked about meeting students where they are and honoring their composing practices and having that kind of conversation is an important part of that. And it's not just to some degree in my school, it's difficult for me to say, okay, ideally I would love for kids to kind of set the curriculum themselves. I would, or rather I should say, co-construct a curriculum with me. There's limitations to that because of the, what happens in schools and what the expectations are. So I try to find ways to do that co-creating. So I think, Grace, what you're talking about kind of reminds me of my role as co-creator in the classroom, and not as tool giver, for lack of a better term. I think it's important to remember that inquiry stance of being co-learner with the students and being open to the learning going in directions that we might not have imagined when we started.
You can see my niece a little bit behind me. I'm just going to let you know that that's why there's another body. She's helping me back.
If you want
I'm just going to turn this a little bit.
We could ask her what
she's been listening. I'm going to embarrass her by talking about connected learning, because she spent this last year doing a little bit of that co-construct. I'm not going to make her come in and talk at all, but she's done a little bit of that co-constructing and constructing her learning, and so she could emphasize art and doing this work online. And it's definitely, online isn't the fix, and I think sometimes people trip up on that. Like, they just hand out the tools. They just say, oh, let's take learning online, and there's all these magical connected things are going to happen. It's not necessarily the case. For the most part, courses just move from the old structure offline to the same structure online. And it doesn't mean that there's any more connections for people who are working online. And I won't speak for her, but I know a lot of youth who've had that experience when they start to do even co-constructing, and then connections through work that's online, and it not a magic fix. We've got a great calls coming in from somewhere.
No, sorry about that. I think that's my phone. Not someone I know.
So sorry, I derailed this when I came back on, but I was listening, Michael.
It's okay. It's okay. I was going to throw out another question, which is, again, I'm thinking of, if you haven't read Maha's blog, she blogged 5 things she's going to take with CL MOOC, and take from CL MOOC with her. And then she mentioned to me and Kevin that she wrote that blog before she read the newsletter, which was kind of cool. So one of the things she mentioned is her personal learning network, or her PLN, has gotten bigger as a result, and so she said that's one of the great things. So I guess my question is, how do you imagine, as you go forward, how do you imagine the connections, if you'll pardon the pun, how do you imagine the social connections you've made in CL MOOC? How do you imagine your new members of your personal learning network supporting you in your efforts to move forward?
Well, Sherry Edwards made a whole separate, which she posted in the Google Plus community too, for middle school educators, called In the Middle. And I haven't had too much, unfortunately, I haven't explored it a lot, but that's one great way that I could see. I'll be teaching middle school in the fall. It's one great way that I think will be awesome to share resources with other middle school educators, and just to get ideas from other people. So I thought that was one cool thing that came out of the MOOC for sure.
I know that a lot of my makes, I'm moving this week. I was away and disconnected for another week in the middle, and so a lot of my makes are mid-make right now. And it's like I feel like I owe the community my makes, which is I don't feel too bad about, in the sense that I hope to continue to engage with people in what I'm making, and I hope that that I can continue to get the feedback and the thoughts from them as we do that. And all I have to say that I think that most of my professional learning now is through connections made through. I also host the literacies chat, and then do the through CL MOOC and through other means that most of my own personal resource bank. I follow the feeds of Kevin and Terry, and that's where I get all my new tools. And there's just so many people that my IRL life, my in real life, I might read an article that someone mentions or that comes in the mail, but I read far more articles that are posted through my main needs personally is Twitter, but through the various means and feeds and things. So yeah, I hope that will just continue. That's my answer. I can't imagine that anything else coming up would be better.
I'm feeling like the CL MOOC has been it's a little paradoxical. And for some of it, I felt like it was all about me. I was doing my own thing, and I was creating stuff, and I was really getting a lot of creative energy. And then I realized that energy wasn't just about me, that it was coming from the community, that it was listening to what other people were doing, seeing what other people were doing, and actually getting the feedback from people, because there was such a concerted effort for people to respond to each other that I think made the community such a functional part of the richness for the individual. So there was this individual thing and this community thing going on at the same time. That's hard to describe.
Can I jump in on that? I'm sorry. I'm like sitting over here and then I jump in. Because I think that's a really interesting way to describe it, Grace. And I didn't really, I felt like I knew that, but I did the Make a Case maker's notes and the Make log. So if people have seen that, I wanted to, sort of reflect on my work as I was going along. And doing those maker notes really got me thinking about, oh, wait, all these other people are connected what I just made. And, I wasn't even conscious of it. And then I started, actually describing it to myself, and then it became that much more clear how all the influences and all the pieces that I had just picked up. Because I did feel like, oh, I just made this myself, blah, 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 I'll post it out there. But then I could see so much more when I did the notes. So.
Anna,
I was just going to say to Christina, she wants to tell us.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Christina, can you tell everybody where to find all that, in case they don't know?
Sure, yeah. So there'll be more out tomorrow in the newsletter that we're going to send tomorrow. But right now, if you look at the Jump In on the blog, so it's clmooc.educatorinnovator.org is the blog, and there's a link to Jump In, and one of the ways you can jump in is to make a case. And by jumping in, it's the idea is that there's a set of makes, and Anna can say this better than me, but there's a set of makes you can do that are reflecting on the makes that you did. So you can make these sort of logs and notes and actually dialogue around some of the makes and the community connections that you're building as you go along. So we'll put a link to that in the chat. And Anna has used these tools of maker notes and logs before as a way to start to understand your path as a maker and just your learning process as a maker. And I found them really helpful in doing that.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to have to run to finish up things before we get our moving truck and everything. That'll come in a few hours. But my last thought was this. You know, this morning, speaking of Kevin, he posted this great comic about you know, a reluctant reflector. And I don't know if there's a piece of him that's reluctant to reflect this week, or, you know, what voice he's voicing there. But one of the things was that he was saying, oh, we have to reflect and we have to do it in writing. And I think that, especially being National Writing Project folks, that we think immediately of reflection as being something that's in writing. But I know immediately I was thinking, oh, it really doesn't have to be at all. You know, I'd love to see us be thinking of reflection in images, you know, like an actual reflection, right? A collage of different makes. How about hacking some makes, or remixing makes as a way of making to reflect this week? And you know, it'd be interesting. You know, I think that yeah, it was something about, as this is our Make With Me hangout, I mean, I have to leave, but I'd love to hear what people are thinking of making this week to reflect. I think that'd be a really interesting thing to talk about.
I think it was interesting.
I know, but it was really nice talking to each of you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Bye, Anna. Bye, Anna.
Good move.
Thank you.
That's I think a really good question. You know what? At this point, I'm sort of in between makes. I didn't finish my 5-image story, and I'm still working on that. And I was kind of thinking, I was kind of inspired by the multiple newsletters for this week, and thinking I would just do multiple blog posts. So I think my makes this week are going to be blog posts that incorporate my sort of catch up from last week. I know that, you know, it's not linear and everything, but I kind of feel like what Anna was talking about, I want to go back and do the make that I didn't finish last week, because I started it and I just ran out of time. I also would like to, I think part of my blog post will be reflecting further on the different make cycles. So like the how-to, today I was making curry, and I wanna that was kind of a hack and a how-to, because I used a recipe from online and then I messed around with it just because I didn't have all the ingredients. So I was just playing with it, so I kind of want to document that and reflect a little bit more on how the different make cycles in my mind connect. Is kind of my make. It's very rough drafty at this point. What are other people thinking?
Well, I just wanted to say real fast that when I did the make notes and make log, I just I took my phone and just talked to it and made a video, and then I used SoundCloud for another one of them that I did with a dialogue with a friend. And so for me, using video and audio is like something that I still need to get better at. So I wanted to use those things. And I'm also influenced a lot by youthvoices.net, where the youth in that site are encouraged to do video logs and dialogues and what they call like a detox or a check-in with yourself. And you sort of think about things that you connect. Oh, notice, connect, dream, do, I think are the prompts at youthvoices.net. and the youth often do them on video. So I was thinking about that work and thinking about, oh yeah, how can you use video and sound to sort of, you know, take your work to another place.
Kind of, I guess, on a different side of that, I know Wordle is one of those things that I feel like has been around, but what I like about it is that if you input, you know, whatever things you're going to input, so if I inputted, you know, the words that I used in all of the makes that I created, it then, you know, it combines them, and the biggest word is the word that was used the most often, things like that. And I think that could be a really interesting place to then reflect on which ideas were popping up, and are there any that I'm surprised by, and does it make me think more about where I want to go in the future? I think that might be it. I saw someone did it last year's CLMOOC, I think, and it was really cool, and it's something that might be one way that I would consider reflecting this year as well.
I'm thinking of trying out two things. One thing that I'm very familiar with and one thing that I'm not. So what I'm familiar with is VoiceThread. So I'm thinking of putting my ideas out in terms of the themes and the connected learning principles that I feel I've played with and connected with through that application. But then I want to try out something new. I think I'm going to also purposely, over the next few days, try one of the new things that other people have introduced me to, one of the tools that, you know, as a tool can help me to express myself. So I want to do a little bit of old and new and play with the idea that I think I tried to put out there a little bit, saying there are tools and there are themes that have sort of come out of the CLMOOC for me. There's tools, but there's also deep themes, and I want to play with both of those before the next week is out. Somehow.
So I have maybe a couple more questions I want to throw out there, and then maybe as we get closer to the end of our hour, we could do just kind of last thoughts. I think we talked about how the folks in CLMOOC that are, you know, now part of our professional learning community or network are going to support us, or how we imagine them supporting us. And I guess the flip side of that question is, how can we, or how do you see yourself sharing these ideas, the CLMOOC principle, the connected learning principles, or your CLMOOC experience, or a combination of that, with other educators and learners? I guess I'll just answer my question first, which is one of the things I want to do, and this is not a really it's not very high tech, but I just want to get teachers at my school in my classroom and show them what I'm doing. Maybe not the first day I'm trying it, but I want to share. I guess the overall idea is I want to share more of the things I'm doing. So last year, as I was trying out a couple of inquiries, one was just getting my kids to blog, which I know is kind of 2006, but I had never really done it before successfully. So I got my kids blogging, and they did some of the students really took to it and did some wonderful stuff. And then in the second semester, I tried out some more interest-based research, and that didn't go as well, mainly because I didn't structure it very well. So I'm not sure yet what my specific inquiry question is going to be for the fall, but I know that I want to get teachers in my room to see ways that I'm letting students make co-creating choices, if you will. And I want to share the work that my students are doing a little bit more.
I love what you just said about making an inquiry question for yourself, because I think coming out of the CL MOOC, I want to create an inquiry question for myself that is about how to help teacher consultants in the New York City Writing Project conceive of writing project workshop series that incorporate connected learning principles and facilities. I'm not even going to say tools, but how to bring connected learning into the workshop model that is genuine to the writing project, but also has an eye on what are the expanded possibilities of the kind of learning that the writing project and connected learning can make possible.
Yeah, that's exciting, Grace, and I wanted to pick up on that a little bit because, and this idea of an inquiry, I think is really, positive idea to move forward. And one of mine is to circle back to the equity question. What has to happen to support connected learning and be an equitable reality for most youth today, for all youth today? And then for me, a big piece of that, being at the Writing Project, is how do we support educators in also having these connected learning experiences so that they can support their youth and foster these kind of connected learning ecosystems for youth. And since we're connected to such a large network of educators that keeps growing, I see that as a really important theory of action moving forward in support of equity. And so yesterday I was at the Pennsylvania Area Writing and Literacy Project out in Westchester, and I took like a little mini curation of some things that teachers made to share with the educators there. And just because, sort of looking at the range of things that people made, and then sort of how one person would use visual poetry. And then all of a sudden, all these other people would also start to do visual poetry. Like this was all under the hack, you get the prompt to hack your writing. And one person goes, oh, okay, I'm going to try it this way, and then shares it online. And then all these other people go, oh, that's really cool, I'm going to try it too, right? So I had a chance to do this little mini curation and show how this one idea would then sort of like foster itself and grow within this community. And we had a really nice conversation about the power of that and the implications for that, for the classroom and for their thinking in the new year. So that kind of work does feel really important to me and really important with this. And if you take this sort of, like, how do we make this really equitable? That feels like a really key point too.
I think what Grace said about merging the connected learning principles with the writing project workshop is really interesting, because I'm thinking of my writing project, the Los Angeles Writing Project, and we were sort of heavily, I say sort of heavily involved in CL MOOC because there were two of us who, and I was hoping that Jose would be able to join us today, Jose Rodriguez. He had a last minute commitment that he wasn't anticipating, but I was hoping he would join us because he has a lot of great ideas, and he was involved in CL MOOC last year, and that's actually what he told me got him to apply for the Summer Institute. He had done work with Paul Allison and with Karen and Kevin, and Joe. So he knew a lot of the people before he even knew really what the writing project was or got involved with the writing project. Anyway, the two of us were very involved, and we tried sharing it out to the other fellows in our Summer Institute, and it didn't really take the way we had hoped it would. Not that they were resistant or anything like that. The other fellows listened, but it didn't. I was hoping that it would become more organic in our summer institute, and it didn't really. What ended up happening, and maybe this has to do with the way I'm envisioning it, and maybe it's the way I'm presenting connected learning. Maybe I present it unintentionally as being about technology, and so I'm wondering how I can be more of kind of an ambassador for connected learning principles in the Summer Institute format, as well as at my school and in other contexts. Which anybody can chime in on it. Just kind of like my question. Mike, maybe that's my inquiry. Maybe I'll have two inquiries. Maybe I'll I'll have a in the classroom inquiry and a sort of like teacher leader practice inquiry. But that's certainly a question that I'd like to follow up on myself.
I was just going to say, Michael, I'm sorry I'm talking on top of you.
No, it's okay.
I just appreciate it, because I do think that sometimes I accidentally make it sound about technology. And what I think is true is that so many educators, like, this is beyond the writing project. I mean, you know, we're connected through Ed Innovator, and we're connecting with all these educators in and outside of school and all different sorts of networks. And as educators, I think that, you know, we really do recognize these principles in many ways, and then we just have to, like, we really need to think about them in this current context and take on new things because of the current context. But yeah, so I just wanted to say that I appreciate the way you started this conversation, Michael, because that at the beginning of this Make With Me, when you asked about connected learning, I feel like I just learned so much from you guys around talking about connected learning. Like, I just thought that was a really nice conversation at the beginning. And sometimes it is a matter of how we talk about it, because I do think that this, you know, this is what many educators really know deeply. So how do we connect all, you know, the various pieces here with a very rapidly changing environment?
So this would probably be a good time to move into final thoughts. Also, we have just a kind of logistical or housekeeping issue. We have our Twitter chat coming up on Thursday at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern. So want to throw out the idea, if anybody wants to help facilitate that, that would be fantastic. And Christina, Mallory, maybe you could talk about what that would involve for like 20 seconds or however long you want. You don't have a time limit, but do you want to just like add on?
Yeah. Do you want to tag team? So what have you seen this month while we've been doing Twitter chats?
And basically the Twitter chats are really fun, and usually whoever is facilitating it is usually coming up with questions that they honestly just want to hear people's thoughts on, and they post them, and then people reply. And so it's a little bit of brainstorming questions on the front end, but you get a lot of support from the facilitation team within CL MOOC as well. So it's always fun. I really like the Twitter chats.
And I like this idea of what you said of authentic questions. Like they have felt like real questions that people have just brought forward. You know, so I can imagine, you know, like this invitation to facilitate just means like, do you have questions you want to bring forward on Thursday? And I don't know, what do you think, like 5 or 6 questions?
Yeah, maybe 5 or 6, and then usually the people answering them come up with other questions that lead on tangents.
Right, there's all sorts of tangents.
Yeah.
I just had a thought, in the interest of making it more participant-based, not that it hasn't been, but to get participants to facilitate, could we just make a Google Doc and shoot it out? And kind of, and I don't mind, I could be the person who types the questions, the sort of on the day facilitator, but I would love like the questions not to be my questions, but the questions to be from the community, and then I'll just curate the questions and just type them up.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So
it's crowdsourcing authentic questions from the community.
Yes.
Yay.
Cool. So if you want, I'll make that doc, and then I'll just like I'll start distributing it, and you guys can help me.
And we can push it around. That's great.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Okay. Cool. Okay. So before we close our hour, final thoughts, and I'll throw out a final thought, which is I'm gonna actually throw out Karen's thought as my final thought. In the chat, she said, I think it's a challenge to make connected learning not look like one more thing in quotes. I think that's a really, really important thought, because that is, it's really, we have, you know, one more thing fatigue, especially at my high school. Everybody has heard the, you know, the newest thing, and it seems to be a common, I don't know if it goes back to No Child Left Behind and the urgency to raise test scores and all the sort of things that were happening with policy that were bad for teaching and bad for kids, and you know, well-intentioned people were under pressure to introduce new initiatives that really didn't support teachers or students. So I don't know if that's, you know, something that's unique to my school, or if it's something that a lot of people have experienced over the past, you know, 10 or so years of initiative fatigue. But I could see that at my school if I were to talk about this and people would go, oh, okay, here's the newest thing, you know, now we have to do one more thing, and that's really important. So I appreciate Karen bringing that up, because that'll help me as I try to be an ambassador, think about how to make it shareable and sort of, I guess the word I'm looking for, I don't like the word scalable because it feels kind of jargony to me, but for lack of a better word, scalable. How can I share it in a way that encourages people to, because I really think one of the key things with CL MOOC and connected learning is trying new things, just being open to failing and being open to trying new things, and to paraphrase Michael Fullen, questions are our friends as long as you do something about them. So that's kind of my final thought.
I think one of the things, I mean, building off of what you said and going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that idea of framing, getting away from that idea of the next big thing, is that framing that goes beyond it being another digital, you know, solely digital, because like we were saying at the beginning, there's so much of the connected learning is the networks built with other people, and all of the, you know, and all of the learning that we're doing on our own. And so I think, which is I don't know the best way to go about doing that, but the challenge, I think, is definitely framing it as not just something that's, you know, online, the next big thing. It's something that's beyond that, and it's about that inquiry and having those questions for students and finding ways to incorporate that in the classroom.
And
one final thought is about both the frame and the question that I can bring into the school year. Like, this has been such an amazing explosion of ideas and wonderful things that, bam, September will come and I'll be in the classroom, I'll be with teachers, and not that I'll forget, but that I won't actually connect to what I actually experienced over the summer. So I want to sort of narrow the field a little for myself for bringing it to the reality of the school year. And I think both the framing, the question, and what's real for the context where I am is something I want to, before the next week is out, position for myself so that I know how I can make sure that it wasn't just a summer experience, that it's something that I continue.
And I was going to say that I really, picking up on what Mallory just said here and then what Grace said earlier, was this idea of also tapping into this into the literacies of this, and tapping into ourselves as readers and writers and makers really does help us go back to some of, you know, our roots of like finding out who the kids are as participants, as creators, as Michael was saying, as you know, as artists in their own right and as authors. And so those are the ideas that are sticking with me right now and sort of floating around.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. At this point, we'll go ahead and sign off, and hope everybody had a positive Make With Me experience and learned a lot. I certainly have a lot to think about. And so be on the lookout for the Twitter chat, Google Doc question collector. Okay, thanks again, everybody.
Thank you for jumping in there, you guys. And thank you so much, Michael, for organizing.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for your help. Thanks, Grace, for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
You too. Thank